Hi, I'm Maribel Lopez, the founder and principal analyst at Lopez Research, and I'm thrilled to be here today, joined with such amazing industry luminaries. Today we have with us David Sheraton, Bob Friday, Kiriti Kompella, and Andy Ori. Why don't we get started with introductions? David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. I was a professor at Stanford in computer science and started the first networking course there 40 years ago. And since then, I've taught networking and distributed systems. I've also been involved in founding several networking companies. And most recently, I was a founder and CEO of Apstra that was doing network automation that got recently acquired by Juniper. So here I am.
Wonderful. Bob?
Yeah, Bob Friday. Yeah, so I started my career on the wireless network back in the 80s when the FCC came up with the unlicensed spectrum rules. So I send them a Christmas card every year saying thank you. The whole career is dedicated to the FCC and those rules. From there, I went on to basically do a nationwide mesh network at Ricochet Metrocom long before cellular. After that, I went off and started a company called Airspace, which was really focused on enterprise and helping them manage the beginnings of these Wi-Fi networks that we're deploying. Was at Cisco for 8 years, mobility CTO, and then went off and started Mist, which was really kind of focused on this cloud AI paradigm shift. And from there, I sold Mist to Juniper 2 years ago, and now I'm at Juniper and here with you today.
Great. Kiriti, share.
Hi, my name is Kiriti Kompella. I started Juniper 24 years ago in the 5th sub-basement writing kernel code. I crawled my way up out of there and started working on routing protocols, going to standards bodies, going to the IETF. Got interested in advancing that routing standards, but moved on to the last 5 years where I've been talking about self-driving networks and the technologies that we need to get there. And now I'm working on a project that is a building block for the self-driving network. Happy to be here.
Thank you. We're excited to have you. Andy, let's round it out with you.
Yes, I've been involved like Bob since the 80s in communication infrastructure. I'm a serial entrepreneur and I've started and successfully grown 3 different businesses. We've engaged in deploying products in 110 different countries. And my latest business, 128 Technology, that I was a co-founder of, is now part of Juniper Networks. And it really is a culmination of trying to realign the world, the connected world, from what it was used for to how it is being used and anticipating its future use in a way that can impact business outcome to create enterprise value.
Okay, I think that this is great that we have so many people representing so many different parts of the stack here. Speaking of the stack, I've been in networking and telecom industry for a long time. And in that space, I think we've come to the point where a lot of people talk to me and they say, hey, isn't this a commodity? Is there anything really interesting going on with networking? And I'd like to pose that question to this panel. I mean, is that true? Do we feel that it's over in the networking phase? And what should organizations be doing right now? Maybe we could start with you, Andy.
Sure. I mean, there's never been more change in networking than there is today, between the movement to the cloud, the connection of wireless networks, mobility, the importance of security, and this whole notion of digital transformation and engagement. I mean, we've all unfortunately lived it over the last 12 months, but it is just facilitating massive change. So I think that you can look at parts of networking that are commoditized and the market values that one way. And you can look at the part of networking that is fundamental and strategic to what enterprises are trying to engage in, and that's highly valued. And so I tend to want to skate to where things are valuable, strategic, because I think that means they're exciting.
All right, so you think networking's hot. Anybody not think networking's hot? Anybody think it should be different? David, what's your perspective on this?
I think that networking is a little boring at one level, and we're converged around Ethernet, we're converged around IP, and a lot of stuff is converged compared to, the diversity of network technologies we had years ago. But one of the things that has also changed is, as Andy mentioned, that you know, the network really is the foundation for digital transformation. I like that metaphor in the sense that all the digital transformation sits on the network. The metaphor breaks down because this foundation can fall through the ground very quickly. And so to me, one of the exciting pieces is that we're dealing with not a piece of concrete, but a complex set of interacting components that are doing trillion things a second. And when things go wrong, your foundation falls apart. So to me, the exciting part is making that foundation as reliable as a skyscraper foundation.
I love that concept. You need a foundation to build on. Looks like you're
I'm going
reading.
to pick up on what David just said, because I'm going to take an analogy with the power networks, you know, the distribution of power to our houses. Back about 100 years ago, there was this big fight about whether we should use DC or AC. And you know, you can read all about it. But in the end, we did shift to AC. We run 110 volts here. Over in Europe, they run 220 volts. So there's a lot of excitement, a lot of stuff going on there. But it's all settled down. And the fact that it's settled down might mean that it's commodity and it's boring. What it does mean for me is I don't worry about you know, what plugs do I carry, and you know, does my thing work on 110 or 220? So when I'm traveling, so I think it would be great for networking for the end user to get a little bit more boring, where I don't really worry about how I would get my connectivity when I got there. I'd just have ubiquitous connectivity. It would be good connectivity. Behind the scenes, there could be a lot of stuff going on. And so what we're having today is trying to manage solar power, wind power, you know, coal-based power, and manage it in the right way. But for the user, I just take my stuff. I don't think about it. I don't worry, is it 50 hertz or you know, 110 volts? I just plug it in and it works. The one thing you shouldn't do is try to hammer your plug into a socket of a different kind. If you just get the right socket converter, you're fine. But can we get there with networking? We're far from there now. So I think it would be nice for networking, for the end users, for networking to be a little more boring.
Okay, so not boring enough is what I'm hearing. Okay.
So for me, Barrow, but when I look at this, I think of this in the context of evolution. You know, if you look over, you know, just my lifetime of the last 30 years of working in networking, you know, we've gone from internet, no mobility. You know, when I started, you know, I was happy to have a 9.8 kilobit per second internet connection, right? You know, so if you look at evolution, the networking is like a living organism. It is evolving quicker now than it ever has in the last 100 years, right? You know, we've gone from almost no mobility to where now almost 70% of all our internet traffic is over some mobile connection. You know, if you look where we're headed in the future, we're connecting more things. You know, so when I look at networking right now, we're just evolving from workloads that were in the enterprise space. All those workloads are now distributed across data centers everywhere. And if you look in the future right now, the networking is going to be evolving even faster than what we've seen over the last 30 years. So for me, it's far from a commodity. It's an evolving organism that is evolving faster than we've ever seen.
What I really love about what I'm hearing here is we've got everything from network being the foundation, which is true, to being a living, breathing organism that is constantly evolving, which makes a lot of sense and is what you need for your business right now, because it's never been clearer that agility is the name of the game. So creating that foundation that can also be agile is extremely important. And I know in several discussions I've had with each of you in the past, we've talked a little bit about that agility and that adaptive nature. So what should organizations be doing right now, if that's the case? You know, Bob, what do you think people should be doing right now?
Yeah, you know, for me, you know, I've in my career, the latest transition I've seen going on is really this transition from, you know, 20 years ago when I was doing networking, it was all about helping people manage their devices elements. I think right now we're starting to see this transition where it's really managing this end-to-end experience. You know, it's no longer good enough to just manage the AP, the router, the switch, or the device in your home if you're a consumer. It's really what you care about is, you know, what is my interconnection really experience like? And that's really a kind of the end-to-end user experience. You know, so when I talk to people, it's more about connectivity because we're seeing things get much more distributed, right? The days where everything was self-contained, those days are over with now. We have applications and devices running very distributively that we're trying to connect to over the network. And our problem is really, how do you manage these connections? And not so much about managing the elements of the network. So that's, when I talk to people, it's more about how to deal with the complexity of the network that's growing around you now.
Kiriti, what are you hearing?
I think this drives into the previous question. If you can make networking boring for the end user in the sense that they don't have to worry about which power am I connected to Bob's point about we're all mobile. What frequency should my mobile connection be connected at? If you can say your phone will just work, your connection will be just fine, it'll adapt to the bandwidth that's available. Behind the scenes, there's got to be a lot of things happening so that experience that the user is getting is actually met. So that's the dichotomy. For the user, things should be easy, should be maybe boring. They should have very little to do. And what's behind that should say, I'm going to be constantly adjusting things so that user's experience is great. And that constantly adjusting could be done by a human, but it also could be done with the help of automation. So that combination of a human sort of overseeing it, automation doing the heavy lifting, but the end user getting the experience that they want. I think if we're in that place, then we're so much better off than we are today. We're moving in that direction, but we're not there yet.
Can I jump in here? Slightly, you said, what should organizations be doing now? And I believe we're facing a bit of a crisis here because there's not enough skilled network operator engineers to operate the growing set of networks. There's 30 to 40 years of evidence that most of the failures are caused by human error. And as we said, the network is the foundation, and we're still operating networks at the level that we used to operate cars when we adjusted the spark advance. People know what that means. And so we've got to get out of this. And the answer has to be automation. There's no other option on the table. And I think there's significant progress being made in how we automate networks. And this is not your grandmother's network management where all it does is throw up information and you're supposed to make sense of it. This is trying to take over the configuration, the monitoring, the root cause identification of what's going on with the network, because I believe we're at this point where we can automate this and we can dramatically improve the operation of a network and improve the experience of somebody running a network, which right now is a pretty horrible one because you're basically on call 24/7 to solve inscrutable problems. It's hard to stay married.
If I can add on to that, David, I agree with you. I just think it's important that we understand what it is we're trying to automate and what our goal is. From some perspective, a network is a cost center. And when asked how is a network performing for the organization, you can look at link status, you can look at uptime, and you can say, here's how it's performing. But I think that all of us on this bridge think that networks can also be strategic, that can be value drivers for an organization. And for that to be the case, networks need to be able to do something they can't do today. They need to be able to understand who is using it and what they're trying to accomplish, and what else they could be doing that would help the business strategically become more competitive, more profitable, and more valuable. So I think that as we automate, it's important that we capture or encompass what the strategic role of a network could be and what the business is trying to accomplish.
I think we started to hear a lot about this in the telecom sector, where they've been talking about network embedded services, but it looked like David wanted to follow up on that point.
Well, I just want to say that I agree with Andy, but I hope we can all appreciate that when you add this extra requirements on the network, you're complicating it further. And so when you say, understanding what applications are doing, if you understand it wrong, you can make things worse. And so I think that these are double-edged swords, and we have to make sure automation is swinging the sword in the right direction. And I think, many of the things we might talk about of automation may not be completely ready to deploy today, but what I see is a lot of organizations have just not prepared themselves to automate. They are not thinking about what should we be automating, what tools are available, what do we expect is going to be feasible down the line, and how do we get from here to there so we're not blindsided when this technology is really taking off and our competitors are using it.
And Maribel, I mean, for those who know me, right, for me, automation, this AI ML is really the next ultimate step in this automation phase, right? If you look at cars being able to self-drive or anything, that same concept applies to networking, where we can actually start building things that can actually do things on par with humans, right? And automation is really just kind of that concept. AI ML is just really taking that automation to the next level. Now we're going to start doing things on par with network domain experts. Right. And I think that is the next part where we're headed, is how do we bring that automation, especially with the complexity of the networking we're starting to see around us. And as Andy points out, these networks are becoming much more strategic to businesses, right? In our early days, right, a business had all its network inside its firewall. Nowadays, if the internet goes down, their business stops. That internet connectivity, wherever these workloads are running, they have to keep that networking up and running for their business to stay up and running nowadays. And that's the complexity that AI ML is going to help start dealing with more and more now.
And I think that gets us to the next step, where by not only controlling the complexity within the network, we can actually take complexity out of other systems, starting with the humans who are using this network. Someone saying, oh, I wish I had gotten that higher tier of bandwidth because I'm not getting the connectivity that I need. Instead, the network realizes this person is using an app that needs more bandwidth, and that brings more bandwidth makes more bandwidth available, and so responds to not even their stated intent, but their real intent, to making apps easier to write, because apps today have to keep looking at the network and saying, what do I need to do in the network to keep up? Oh, I'm seeing that there's some packet drops, so I'm going to adjust. So you have this variable encoding of video, and I'm going to adjust in real time to what's going on in the network. If the network could do that response, then the app can be simpler. So by taking on that complexity and solving it in the network, the complexity for the user trying to understand all the different knobs that they have to be able to deal with changes in the network or in the apps, that goes away. And we move that to the layer where it really belongs. But the network has to be ready to say, I understand what's going on and I can respond. David's point is very valid. If you start doing a lot of automation, it can cut both ways. But if it cuts in this direction and cuts the complexity of the users of the network, whether they're human or applications, we've moved the industry forward a huge step.
So I love where everybody's going with this, because we're looking at automation, we're looking at AI, we're starting to tee up what the future is. So I think both Bob and Kiriti, you started to tee up like what the future is. But I'm going to ask you to go one click deeper, and maybe since you were already going, Kiriti, and your role is kind of interesting because you look at the 3, 5, 10, right? When you're looking at the 5 and the 10, what are you thinking about, and what do you think the audience should be thinking about?
So Bob just mentioned it quickly. This notion of self-driving, today we're looking at a lot of self-driving cars. And we started back in 2004 with a challenge, a grand challenge from DARPA, and said, can we build a car that completely runs itself? And at that time, it was, wow, you guys are completely nuts. And here we are like on the cusp of it. It's still not there, which means that the last bit is still difficult. But the idea that you have a self-driving car is going to change the automotive industry so completely. I think that we can do the same with networks. And we can start in places where it's a little easier and say, can I build a network that will do everything that typically humans do to manage that network? to bring up new services, to recognize the customers and make sure that they're getting what they need. But, and then maybe go beyond that and anticipate, and do that in an environment that's relatively simple, but then do that across the entire network. So this idea that you have a network that completely runs itself, maybe the same way that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the idea of a car that completely ran itself would have been nuts. I think that's very real, and that's a tangible target that we could go after. And we are in places, but there are a lot of missing technologies. So just as in self-driving cars, there's this big question of, do I use cameras, stereo cameras, or do I use LiDAR? In self-driving networks, we have the same question. What is the best source of telemetry? Because if I don't have the right telemetry at the right time with the right quality, I can't make good decisions. So we are walking this, this path, but I think the end of it, at least for me, is a network that runs itself. And if you go back to the original question of commodity, well, from the point of view of the user of the network, if the network is just running it by itself and giving me what I need, the network itself is not commoditized. But from the user's point of view, it's really easy. And maybe that's where we should go.
We talked about this whole, people have a lot of data, but is it the right data? So thinking of, and maybe there's a role for you to help them get to more of the root cause of things versus, the myriad of alarms and alerts and data and whatever that we were talking about. And Bob, I don't know where you wanted to go with it. So.
Oh, I was going to go with the, I make a barrel of wine every year. Good wine starts with good grapes. Good AI starts with good data. It's all about data. I mean, that's the first stepping stone to getting there.
That too. Yeah.
But I think
you can keep the data if you give me the wine.
I think there's a challenge here, which is that to me, the worst case scenario that you want to deal with in automation is when something goes wrong, you want to identify, that is root cause, identify what is the root of the problem as quickly as possible. And what I see right now is people are collecting large amounts of data and then thinking they're going to process it later, and that by definition pushes it further down the pike, so to speak. And to me, that's where I think you want to turn this whole process around and say, I want to have a diagnostic engine that's processing the data in real time, and the diagnostic engine needs to know what it needs to know, and that drives the data collection, because the reality is that data collection in the network is expensive, and of course the time you're going to need it the most is when things are under peak load, and that's also the time where you're most likely to have failures, and you're most likely to have the most expensive failures. So I think being highly selective there is going to be an extremely valuable direction to take things, and that's where I've been interested in more of a the medical diagnosis kind of approach to root cause identification, where you know what symptoms you're looking for to identify certain problems, so you know what telemetry you need to get. And in some cases, you can collect the telemetry on demand once you've narrowed it down, just like doctors have to do. They don't get to perform every medical test in the book before they do diagnosis.
I mean, my only point, though, is that I think that automation is incredibly important. Making things simple is incredibly important. But again, it's only half of the equation. You could make things cost less. You could make things appear with a smaller footprint. But if it's not driving value, it's purely a cost-centric model. And I think that many folks who are watching this would be very happy to pay twice as much as what they're paying right now for their network, and hire more people if they could create 5 times the enterprise value. So I do think that the business outcome aspect is really important to make sure is a focus of simplicity and automation.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Andy, right? I mean, ultimately, this is all about trying to make sure the businesses can get their job done, And I would say, kind of back to the data telemetry question, when I started Mist, it was actually kind of inspired by the Watson playing Jeopardy, being able to answer questions on par with humans. And it really, like I told you, I make a barrel of wine, right? So the old saying is, great wine starts with great grapes. Great AI starts with great data. I kind of look at the problem right now, and I agree with David on the telemetry thing. When we started MIST, it was all about making sure we built an architecture that could process data in real time, right? And that was the big difference from what I did 20 years ago, is we really didn't have data pipelines. We took data and we stored it away into some database. Nowadays, you want to process that data real time as it comes in, right? And the question is, what do you have to do with that data to get to that root cause? And this is where I say it's like the Jeopardy thing, right? You have to, depending on what question or what root cause you're trying to answer, it takes a whole bunch of different algorithms, right? That self-driving car is not one magical algorithm that drives that car. It's a whole bunch of complex systems that is driving that car. For me, that's where I think we're headed right now, is basically leveraging these AI ML algorithms that lets us do things that we couldn't do 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I couldn't do anomaly detection because we didn't have the fancy math. Nowadays, we can do the fancy math that makes anomaly detection actually really work with low false positives. So that's where we're headed right now, with trying to be able to process data real time. And it does start with the data. You got to have the right data to actually answer the question.
Okay, so I want to see if we can stretch it just a bit down the road. Andy, like, any thoughts on what's next after that?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, you're almost asking what's the next disruption as opposed to what's the next innovation. I mean, I think that we're all talking about complexity, and as systems become complicated, innovations are harder and matter less. Whereas a disruption resets a system, making it inherently less complicated and allows for a faster pace of subsequent innovations, in my perspective. I happen to think that the anticipatory side, so when I think of machine learning, I think of adaptation, but when I think of AI, I think of anticipation. And I think that the extent to which we could really create a robust anticipatory paradigm, I think we would see real subsequent innovation. So I think that it's AI in its truest sense, something that doesn't have a quantifiable ROI in terms of taking our trouble tickets or mean time to resolution to 0, but something that would actually provide insight to us that is completely different from the kind of insight we're getting today from our complex systems.
I call those right time experiences, the right information to the right person or service at the right moment. And I think we've been moving down that path for a while, but to Bob and David and Kiridi's point, we've had some interesting technology steps we had to make along the way to get there. And computing has obviously gotten better. We've moved into the AI era with GPUs and virtualization. Is there anything else we should be thinking about in computing?
Well, the idea that Andy just articulated, you could take that further. A lot of people talk about intent-based networking. And so you have a stated intent, and then you're going to move the network to meet that intent. But I think when you get to the anticipatory stuff, you have either an unstated intent. So don't do what I say, do what I'm thinking. So you have to sort of tease out what is it that this person was trying to do, and then prepare the network for that. Or you might have an intent that is a repeating intent, and it might not be repeating in time, but there's some triggers that say this is what they need. And so if you can get to the point where the network can adjust to what is needed without that thing that's needed being explicitly stated, I think then again you've really moved the networking industry far. Again, this comes back to, is the customer happy? And if the customer says, wow, this is almost reading my mind and preparing the network for what I'm doing, or just making my life easier, then that's the relationship between that user and the network becomes so much better.
And I must admit, if I can disagree with some of my panelists here, I've been involved with networking for 40 years, I hate to admit, and there's always been these proposals to add various functionality to networks, and yet I don't think they've really gone anyplace. We're stuck with it, just basically Ethernet packets flowing around, perhaps dressed up with IP clothes on them and so on. And yet you come down to this aspect that in terms of business value, the business value is that it's there and you can depend on it. And we talk about this as a foundation, but it's this whole collection of complex pieces that are operating with trillions of events a second. And so to me, you know, we've got a huge task just to get it to the point that it's a solid foundation. And, you know, the solution over the last 40 years to adaptation to applications and so on is just to throw more bandwidth at it. So, you know, when I got in this business, there was kilobit networking. We went to 3 megabit Ethernet to 10 megabit Ethernet to 100 megabit Ethernet to, you know, gigabit to 100 gigabit, on and on and on. And I remember some optical guy telling me, well, people think that optical is got infinite bandwidth, but actually it's only about 30 terabits of usable bandwidth. So we got lots of space to grow capacity. What we can't tolerate is when it just comes to a halt, or even what calls a gray failure. Now, I think over the next 5 years, it's going to be transformational, being able to identify root causes of faults. And what that's going to do is bring down the mean time to repair significantly, but the remaining tall pole in the tent is going to be how long does it take to repair something? So I think once we brought this tall pole down, we're going to be looking at techniques to build in redundancy into networks so that we can adapt in real time. That is, we can auto remediate. And I think that's when we start to getting to a foundation that deserves the name foundation.
Well, I think that's a great point to close on. Creating a foundation that is rock solid and will deliver business value for you going forward, trying to evolve it so that it's contextual, adaptive, learning, and predictive. But once you've created that solid foundation, thank you so much for your time and attention. And I'm sure all the panelists are thrilled that you shared this time with us here today. Thank you.